Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss the perilous state that the Tories have left themselves in with regards their candidates. While other parties have been rushing to get candidates selected over the past week, the Conservatives, the party that actually called the election, are still trailing behind. This time next week, the deadline will have passed for all candidates to be registered, and the Conservatives are still short at this point of nearly 200. I mean, who would have predicted this? Lots of people were thinking that Reform UK may do a deal with the Tories and stand a load of candidates down again. I did sort of try and explain why that would not be this time. But looking at the candidates, like the numbers, you could be forgiven for thinking it's the Tories who are standing down. Most parties were well short on recruitment of candidates when the election was called, but the rest of the major players have been announcing a huge slate of candidates in the last week. The Greens collectively, because it's England and Wales Greens and Scottish Greens combined, have really gone to town. They've added 169 in the last week. Technically, the Conservatives have added the second greatest number of new candidates, almost 100 in the past week, but they were so far behind already. It still leaves them close to 200 candidates short. You know, can they get them all selected in 1 week without any vetting cock-ups that bite them on the arse later? Right now, the only major parties with fewer candidates than the Conservatives are the SNP and Plaid, and there's a good reason for that. They only stand in Scotland and Wales respectively. They've actually selected their candidates. It raises the prospect of the Tories either not having candidates in all seats in Britain or having to pretty much drag people off the streets to do it. Both of those would cause problems. There's a sense in which you might think, well, I mean, they need to concentrate on the important seats, the winnable seats, not worry if some no-hope constituencies get missed off, because there'll be plenty of seats around the country the Tories are not going to win. And although you go, OK, that won't affect election results anyway, it does still pose a couple of problems for the Tories. First of all, it looks bad. It looks incompetent if they can't actually get candidates selected for every seat when they normally can. But also, if they're missing a significant number of candidates, it just, I mean, first of all, the incompetence thing, that the public already believe they're incompetent anyway. It would just help confirm it. But it reduces the Tories' overall number of votes as well. Yes, there are constituencies where they're only going to win a few thousand votes. But if you add up those votes in all of these constituencies where they have no chance, and it's a decent chunk of votes overall. You know, in a first past the post system, total vote tally doesn't mean anything for the result, but it does mean a lot in terms of perception, in terms of the national support you can claim. It's part of that perception. The Tories could already be on for a historically low share of the national vote. Why make it even smaller by not fielding candidates in some areas? But there's also a danger in rushing to get people who will be little more than paper candidates. You still want these areas to have a decent campaign to build up that national share of the vote. But even if a single candidate has a dodgy social media history, they will be outed after the deadline. One really bad candidate can cost votes for every other candidate in the country. Take Ian Dale, for example. So a right-wing commentator on LBC, or used to be on LBC. He quit his job on the radio to stand for the Conservatives in Tunbridge Wells. Unfortunately, it transpired that he's expressed his disapproval of the place a couple of years ago. So he won't be standing there after all. I'm quitting my job to stand for Parliament in Tunbridge Wells, you know. A few days later, I am no longer standing for Parliament in Tunbridge Wells. It seems I called the place a shithole a while back and the local natives didn't appreciate my opinion. Oh dear. Now, this is a famous commentator, so the quote came out quite quickly and, you know, probably led to the fact he wasn't selected at all. But imagine something like that or worse coming out about a candidate who's not particularly famous and therefore it might take a little while to find it after they've already been selected. Because believe you me, when candidates are selected, there'll be activists of other parties locally digging into their social media past and anything else, you know, where they've been reporting the local news, for example, they'll be digging. You know, anything that comes to light after the deadline's passed, imagine that, because then the Tories can do nothing about it. They can't select a new candidate. They can't even withdraw that candidate. Imagining it happening in an important seat. We saw the mess that can happen with the Rochdale by-election. Imagine it happening in the general election, important seat. Speaking of which, the former Tory MP, Julian Knight, who's the one who stitched up Boris Johnson and got the Russia report sort of partially cleared for publication, he's standing as an independent. Now, that could be awkward because it will split the Tory vote. I will add in that Labour's Jess Phillips, who's the MP next door, reckons the seat is too safe. Knight's not personally popular there, so she reckons it won't affect things. Maybe true, maybe true. I'll defer to her local knowledge, but support for the Tories is so fragile everywhere that I would suggest even pulling a relatively modest number of votes away. You certainly create a larger target for tactical voting to do its work. It just beggars belief that the party which actually called the election, thus proclaiming that they were ready, were quite so obviously not ready at all. I mean, I've seen various comments from people over the last week, not on this channel, but, you know, just in the media, saying, oh, why aren't people having a pop at like Labour or the Greens, for example, for being so short of their target of selections when the election was called? It's like, they didn't call the election. Other parties had the excuse of thinking they had more time. The Conservatives actually got... And even though most Conservative MPs didn't realise the election was going to be called at this point, Rishi Sunak did. And who's in charge of selections? Ultimately, the leader. Like CCHQ is in charge of those selections, really. The Conservatives as well, another factor to consider. The Conservatives are nationally unpopular. That may be downplaying it a bit. In 2019, the Tory vote was jet-powered by purely national party considerations, right? But the Tories are even less popular now than at the start of the campaign. Consistently across multiple pollsters, approval ratings of Labour and Starmer have gone up, and of the Conservatives and Sunak gone down. Different numbers for each pollster because they use different methods, but the same trend. And when you get the same trend across different methods, then that trend is probably true. The Times are reporting that although the Conservatives have increased their appeal among 6% of voters, so 6% of voters have looked at the last year and week and a bit, of campaign and go, oh yeah, the Conservatives are better than I thought. For 18%, they've got a dimmer view of the Conservatives now. So they've like appealed a bit to 6% of voters and actually annoyed 18%. Now, Rishi Sunak says he's a big fan of maths. As an investment banker, I'm quite sure he is. I'm not sure he's enjoying political maths. So the Tories began as underdogs and are still digging downwards. In other words, the candidates and local party activists are going to need to do more heavy lifting in order to win in their constituencies because the national leadership is not exactly helping. Well, this is also not helped by delaying the selection of candidates. You know, yes, Tory activists could go knocking on doors saying, vote Conservative, vote Conservative. As soon as they're asked, tell me about your candidate, they've had to go, we don't actually have a candidate. That's not good. Even if the Tories do pull this roughly 190 candidates out the hat in 7 days, and they're all vetted and no skeletons in their closet, at least none that come tumbling out, they're still only going to have a few weeks to actually campaign. Because consider, once the candidate's selected, that doesn't mean say, oh, now the campaign can begin properly. Because you've still got to then design and print campaign literature with the name and photos of the candidate. That takes time as well. They might only have like 3 weeks of proper campaigning. For a dwindling number of Conservative Party volunteers who tend to be, let's face it, on the older side, that's a tough ask. And it's not even like you can get the activists in the safe seats to help out in the marginals, because almost all of them are marginal at best. You know, this really is a golden opportunity to end the Tories. They've been in power for 14 years. They've made absolutely everything noticeably worse. They have a leader who messes up every time he talks to the public. Party discipline's non-existent. There are still Tories standing down even at this late stage. There's another Tory MP stood down today. Well, he's not an MP anymore, but he stood down anyway. His close advisors are imbeciles. His campaign strategists seem to have already mentally checked out. As for Isaac Levidow running the show, I think his reputation is going to suffer a serious setback after this. They've been campaigning at full tilt since the start of the year, but the polls just got worse. They formally kicked off the election campaign just over a week ago, and have since become even less popular. Their saving grace is that a lot of voters are still not paying attention. An Ashcroft poll showed that a very large minority are not aware of any general election campaign stories in the news. So that means there's a lot of people, it's not unexpected, we expect this, a lot of people are not paying much attention. So in theory, if the Tories run a slick campaign from next week, they could absolutely recover because there's quite a lot of voters have no idea about the cock-up so far. But given how things have gone so far and how generally useless Sunak has been in 100% of his photo opportunities in the last week and a bit, who really believes this is going to happen? And to still be needing more than a quarter of your candidates to be selected at this stage seems like a special level of incompetence for, and I'll say it again, the party that actually chose the timing of the election. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe for further content and click the like button. You can also sign up for memberships if you'd like to support the channel further. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later.